All right, so today is a little different. It's about to actually start raining in a couple hours, and I can't really get too much done on the van that I want to. So a lot of it, actually, I can do with the door shut, which is nice. So I'm gonna do painting later. I'm gonna do some man in the can, but this video is actually all about building a custom walnut epoxy table. I'm gonna use these walnut boards now. Really, what I'm doing right now is I'm going to be doing a custom walnut epoxy table. Now, a lot of you may have seen walnut epoxy tables as river tables and things like that, but mine is going to be a little different. It actually is going to look like a brick, and then the mortar of the brick, or in between the bricks, is actually going to be epoxy resin. It's going to be some different colors, ghost style, and then I'm actually going to have the word ghost in the middle of it. This is custom for me, obviously, but I'm considering doing this for other people, custom orders. So it depends on what it's going to cost me and what I would be feeling comfortable to charge. But anyways, I'm going to do this. You're going to see that whole process now, how it gets done. Unfortunately, I'm doing my van build in the Northeast, just outside of Boston, and I couldn't get walnut anywhere. So I actually ordered walnut board off of Amazon. This is a 12-inch piece by 6-inch piece, which dimensionally it worked out perfectly for me, but for some reason, like, I was going to get, it's called dimensional hardwood or dimensional walnut at Home Depot, which they come in typically like 1x3s, 1x4s, 1x6s, things like that. But when they say one, it's actually 3/4 inch wide, and the 2 or the 4 or the 6 is actually usually a 1/2 inch smaller than that. So I was going to use 1x3s, and that would have been 2.5 inches, and I would have cut them up perfectly, but instead I gotta rip this on a table saw to the exact dimension that I want, and then cut it with a chop saw again to make that brick. From there I will lay it all down on a melamine board, which is, it doesn't, epoxy resin doesn't stick to that. That's the only reason why I'm doing it that way. So let's see that whole process right now. Is working on, because he's really good with the belt sander, so he's working on cleaning up the epoxy table I made, and I'm going to show you guys what he's doing right now. There's a couple other ways to do this, by the way. You can do it with a thickness planer, but I didn't have a wide enough thickness planer. Typically you only get them at 12-inch thickness planers. My table is closer to 20 inches wide, so thickness planer will take off that first coat right away, but a sander will do if you're really good at it. But you got to be really careful with having waves in it. And another way is making a jig with a router, and you can take the router and just skim the top of it and kind of take that layer off. But again, making a jig sucks. It takes a while. So let me show you what he's doing. So editing this video, I realized that I didn't do an outro. I didn't really explain everything at the end. So not only am I going to do this for you all now, but you also get a very small preview of what my van is going to look like when it's done. So this is about the epoxy table that I created, which is I'm leaning on right now, and I'm just going to go over the things that I did after my dad was sanding it. But before I go into that, you guys can see that there's not only my epoxy table in front of me here, I also, I'm sitting on my bench, by the way, and my Murphy bed is right here, so maybe you guys can kind of configure where things are right now with my van. I'm sitting on the bench, Murphy bed, sink is actually right here, if you can see it in frame, as well as my faucet. On a last minute decision, when I went out to Portland to finish off the build and do the recirculating shower, I actually built what's behind me just over my head here, which is another epoxy shelf. I didn't show a how-to video on how to do that, only because I've already showed how to do this epoxy table, and I actually got a lot better, and I actually really like that shelf that's up here. And the only difficult part about this shelf is the walls are curved, and these L brackets create a spacer behind here. That was about it. That was really the difficult part about that whole shelf, but it was really cool. It clears the bed, which is over here, so the bed can actually fold down right beside it. And it's just, honestly, the only reason I created that epoxy shelf was to break up the white wall, this big, large white wall right here. I wanted something to break it up. Yes, I could have used artwork, put artwork actually above it. And actually, a friend of mine gave me a really cool piece, which I'm excited to put in the van. After my dad was done sanding, I used an oil. The epoxy that I used, if I didn't put this in the video, the epoxy that I used was an epoxy. It's very eco-friendly. It's also very expensive, but it was worth it. You get the 2-to-1 ratio, which is made for river table pours or table pours. There's other types of epoxy that you use as a coating, like what you see on bar tops, but this is designed more for art and things like that. So I intentionally got the words or the letters ghost to slightly be thinner than 3/4 of an inch. 3/4 of an inch is what the thickness of the table is, and I wanted the word ghost to be just underneath that layer so you could barely see the word. There was a reason for all of that. I wanted that ghostly feel to it. After my dad was done sanding, we then put a coat of oil on it. You can coat it with different types of oils. I would use some really high grade things. Again, I said this like 3 times. After the belt sander, I went over it with many different finish sanders. I started with an 80 grit, and then I went to a 150 grit. I went to a 220 grit, and then I went to like a 400 grit, I want to say. And I might have even used one after that, which was like a 6 something. I used pretty high grit on there to kind of take away all the fine lines. And then it looks like smoky after it's done. It looks like you screwed it up, honestly, after you're done with that. But once you put that oil on, and once you skim it with the oil and you really rub it in and then you buff it out, it comes out to a beautiful shine to it, and the walnut actually pops on it, and then obviously the epoxy itself pops on it as well. I also wanted to mention that you have, after you're done pouring the epoxy, make sure you have a heat gun, and you kind of just go over it a whole bunch to raise the air bubbles. The air bubbles it's a very common thing, but you want to make sure that you're in a good enough environment, because you want those air bubbles to rise and pop, because if there's air bubbles there, then you're gonna mess it all up. You have a heat gun or even a torch is what some people will use, and I've learned this going from this to this is after you're done stirring the epoxy, before you pour it, let it sit for about 15 to 20 minutes and then pour it. That way there'll be way less air bubbles. I had to go over this with a heat gun several times before all the air bubbles were gone. With this, I barely used the heat gun. It also helped that I was in a different environment, and I actually put a space heater inside this little container ship that I was in, a little room that I was in. I put a heater on, and I let the heater run for hours while I was letting that cure. It does take 3 days to cure before you take the form off, and then you can sand it all down and finish out your table that way. So guys, I really hope you enjoyed. Please like, subscribe, check out other build series videos. I also do a vlog about life, adventure, DIY, and getting back into my comedy, as well as one of my favorite things to do, which is touring other people's tiny dwellings, whether it's tiny homes, buses, vans, or whatever it may be. So check all that out. I'll see you guys next time.